Jungkook had always been someone who felt deeply but rarely showed it. The kind of person whose silence could speak louder than any shout, whose stillness carried more emotion than a trembling voice. But no one, not the staff, not the fans, not even Taehyung, expected his silence to become the center of a storm that would shake everyone around them. It started quietly. The phones in the HYBE building always buzzed with something: schedules, reminders, group chats, media alerts. But the buzzing that mattered most came from Taehyung's contact name flashing on Jungkook's personal phone screen. 5 missed calls, then 10, then 15, all in less than an hour. The staff noticed the pattern later when one of the stylists saw Taehyung packing near the practice room, thumbs hovering over his screen, jaw tight, worry simmering under the surface. Taehyung was not the type to spam call anyone. If he called once, it meant something. If he called 5 times, it meant urgency. If he kept calling, that meant fear. Jungkook didn't answer a single one. The world didn't know yet, but the tension inside the building had already begun its slow rise. A translator from the PR team overheard a manager whisper in Korean, "Something's wrong between the Macneys again." The comment was brushed off as workplace gossip, the kind that floated around idle agencies like dust in sunlight. But this time, it was not dust. It was smoke. Jungkook was in the restroom on the 8th floor when the 4th call lit up his screen. The faucet was running, a thin stream of water cutting through the cold, reflective silence of white tiles and polished chrome. He gripped the sink's edge, his breathing slow, measured, but tense, like someone trying to keep their pulse invisible. The overhead fluorescent light buzzed faintly. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real. The kind of light that every hospital hallway, every agency restroom, every late-night studio bathroom shares. The kind that exposes everything you try to hide. He stared at the mirror. No tears, not yet, but his eyes were darker than usual, glossier in a way that suggested emotional dehydration rather than physical fatigue. He didn't look angry, he looked braced. His phone vibrated again. 5th call, Taehyung's name. Still, he didn't pick up. He let the phone ring itself into voicemail. He didn't decline it. Declining meant acknowledging it. Letting it ring into oblivion felt more like erasing it. He wanted erasure. He wanted distance. He wanted to not feel the pull that Taehyung had unknowingly built inside him. Taehyung had left a voicemail after the 3rd call. "Kook, it's Jimin. Please answer him. Please." Jungkook didn't listen. He deleted it halfway through without hearing the rest, as if cutting the message could cut the pain. But deleting audio does not delete atmosphere, and the atmosphere around Jungkook had already grown too thick to inhale comfortably. Outside the restroom, a junior choreographer walked past, carrying a clipboard and humming a half-finished dance count. Normalcy. HYBE thrived on normalcy. Even chaos had to be disguised as choreography. But not this chaos. Jungkook finally turned the faucet off, water droplets hanging from the tap like ellipses at the end of a sentence no one knew how to finish. He looked at his phone again. Missed calls, Jimin, more than Taehyung, more than anyone else in the group. That was the part that made his stomach drop when he finally noticed it. He hadn't spoken to Jimin in 4 days. Not since that night. The night had started with something so small it didn't even deserve a capital letter. A miscommunication, a misread text, a tone interpreted incorrectly. But when emotions run high for months, even a whisper becomes a grenade. Taehyung was in the center of it that night, not by intention but by gravity. Jungkook and Jimin had both tried to pull him into explanations they themselves didn't understand. Taehyung chose nothing. So he said nothing. That silence became the rupture point, the hairline fracture that eventually spread across every surface of their connection. Now Taehyung was in the hospital, not from physical injury, from something quieter, something invisible, something that none of them had learned to translate into words until it was too late. Jungkook walked out of the restroom slowly, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving. He passed the ninth-floor lounge where interns were stacking cups of instant coffee for the overnight staff. One of them looked up and said, "He looks like he's carrying the weather." It wasn't poetic. It was accurate. He was carrying weather. He entered the elevator. 15th floor. Consultation room. He didn't want to go, but avoidance was no longer an option. Even idols who vanish into their own silence eventually hit a floor where the door opens without permission. Jimin was already inside when Jungkook arrived. Sitting in the farthest possible chair, shoulders curved inward like a question mark written by someone who didn't believe in punctuation anymore. His eyes were red-rimmed. Not crying. Not crying, just burning. Jungkook felt the heat from across the room. Their eyes met. No greeting, no preamble, no explosive accusation yet. Just the kind of silence that exists before a judge reads the verdict. Except this verdict was medical, and the medicine was truth. Dr. Shin entered holding a tablet, her face professional, her tone precise. The kind of tone used when test results are printed in irreversible ink. "I'll be direct," she said. "We found the cause of Taehyung's collapse." Jungkook felt his heartbeat move upward, not pounding in his chest, but throbbing behind his eyes like a second pulse, one not monitored by machines, one measured in dread instead of BPM. Jimin didn't breathe. "It's autoimmune, rare, aggressive," Dr. Shin continued, "triggered by sustained emotional stress over a prolonged period." Jungkook frowned. "Emotional stress?" Dr. Shin nodded. "Months, silent, internalized, building without symptoms until his body reacted physically." Jimin whispered, barely audible. T knew. He didn't want anyone to worry. Jungkook turned to him sharply. "And you didn't notice?" Jimin looked up, shaking slightly. "I did. I just didn't want to believe what I saw." The words were heavier than yelling, because denial weighs more than acknowledgement, especially when the consequences are sitting in the ICU down the hall. Jungkook looked at the medical chart Dr. Shin placed on the table, terms blurred, syndromes stacked like walls, data points ticking upward like media metrics. But the only metric that mattered now was this. Taehyung had been drowning silently, and none of them had acknowledged the scream behind the smile. The door opened behind them. A nurse leaned in. "He's awake. You need to come now. The full test results just arrived." Jungkook froze, the air sharpened. Jimin stood up too fast. Jungkook stopped him with a single sentence, low and controlled. "You don't go in first," he said. "Not this time." Jimin blinked, stunned. "Why?" Jungkook swallowed once. The swallow sounded like punctuation. "Because the results weren't about me, or you, they were about him." The nurse exhaled shakily. "You both need to see this." Jungkook took one step toward the door, then another, then stopped again as a realization hit harder than any diagnosis could. What if the collapse wasn't the reveal? He muttered under his breath. What if the reveal is worse than the collapse? Jimin frowned. "What do you mean?" Jungkook looked at the nurse, then at the closed envelope in her hand, marked confidential genetic correlation analysis. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "I mean," he said, "we still don't know the truth yet." And that was the moment the building felt like it tilted. Because the story didn't begin when Jungkook went silent, and it didn't end when Taehyung collapsed. The story was about to begin again, in a way none of them could mute. And this time, the truth would not come in the form of a voicemail. It would come in the form of a lab result. A result that would change everything. But first, they had to open it. And no one was ready. Not even the fans refreshing their timelines outside the frame of this story. Not yet. But soon. The envelope felt heavier than it looked. Confidential documents always carried a certain gravity in the entertainment world, but this one carried something sharper: biology, history, and a truth none of them expected. Jungkook took it from the nurse's hand slowly, like someone accepting a prophecy they didn't ask for. The paper was folded, edges crisp, ink authoritative. The label genetic correlation analysis sat across the top like a verdict stamped before a trial even began. Dr. Shin didn't sit this time. She stood, arms at her sides, tablet lowered, eyes direct. Jimin was already watching Jungkook's hands more than the document itself. Taehyung's room down the hall was quiet for now, but the machines in the consultation room seemed louder, humming like metadata updating in real time. Something was shifting, not viral yet, but cellular. Jungkook opened the fold. The first few lines were clinical: immune markers, stress-induced flare-up patterns, chromosomal alignment sequencing. But then his eyes hit a section that stopped everything inside him. Autoimmune inheritance pattern detected. Genetic correlation with dormant neuroimmune regulator gene present. Match. Jian Jungkook. The room shrank, not physically, but perceptually. Like the walls closed inward, compression too aggressive, emotional bitrate too high. He blinked, reading it again, then again. The words didn't soften, they sharpened. Jimin stood, voice quiet but tense. Kook. No, Jungkook cut him off. Not loud, not theatrical, just precise. The kind of tone that editors used when trimming dead air from a track, except this time he was trimming oxygen from his own lungs. Dr. Shin spoke before Jimin could push further. Let me explain before your mind fills in the worst possible interpretation. Jungkook exhaled once, controlled, measured, then explain it. This gene, she said, tapping the tablet lightly, is not a disease. It's a biological regulator. It sits dormant in almost everyone who has it. It activates only under sustained emotional trauma or long-term internalized stress. Jungkook, your gene did not cause Taehyung's condition. His emotional stress triggered his immune collapse. The markers simply match your dormant pattern, meaning. She paused. The pause was not accidental. It was intentional, the kind of pause used to brace an audience before a twist. It means you two share a matching emotional regulator pattern. His body recognizes yours. When you detach emotionally for long periods, his immune system destabilizes. When you're emotionally connected, his vitals stabilize. Jungkook stared at her. You're saying the worst moments between us made him sick. No, she corrected, holding his gaze. I'm saying the absence of communication during emotional rupture worsened a collapse already building in him. Stress was the trigger. Silence was the accelerant. Jimin swallowed audibly. And you're saying proximity helps him. Not just proximity, she said. Emotional engagement, talking, sharing, connection. His immune system stabilizes when his emotional regulator is active in a healthy feedback loop instead of a suppressed one. Jungkook laughed once. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief edging into despair. A feedback loop, where people, not algorithms. Dr. Shin raised a brow slightly. Human biology runs on loops, some psychological, some neural. Yours just happens to be rare, undocumented until recently, and because your profiles are public figures, misreadable as drama instead of science. Jungkook looked back at the document. One line near the bottom pulsed like a second reveal. Dormant gene carrier does not transmit disease. However, emotional regulation dependency between matched carriers can influence immune response stability under trauma-induced activation. His hands were steady now, not because he was calm, but because the shock had passed the stage of shaking. It had entered the stage of acceptance, the kind of acceptance that arrives right before revolution. So I was pulling away because I thought I was the trigger, Jungkook said quietly. But the real damage was not the trigger, it was the silence. Dr. Shin nodded. Exactly. Jimin stepped closer. T didn't want to say it out loud, but he felt abandoned by both of us that night, not because of what we said, but because no one followed the words with reassurance. Jungkook finally looked at him again. The anger was still there, but it was quieter now, compressed into something denser. and HYBE wanted to compress it into a press release. Jimin didn't defend the company this time. He didn't defend himself either. They always want compression. We gave them broadcast quality silence for years. We should have given him lo-fi honesty instead. Jungkook's heart twisted, not metaphorically, somatically, the kind of twist that doesn't show up on camera but spikes vitals behind the eyes. He stood again, paper still in hand. "Then this is not just a medical diagnosis," he said, looking at Dr. Shin. "It's proof that we can't keep letting silence write the script." Jimin looked at him sharply. "What are you going to do?" Jungkook didn't answer immediately, not because he was avoiding, but because he was calibrating tone. The right tone, the kind that lands. "I'm going to talk to him," he said finally. "Not just because it stabilizes his vitals, but because it stabilizes the truth. And if the label tries to filter this again, they'll have to filter all of us." The nurse shifted slightly, uneasy. "You're artists," she said quietly, "but you're also idols. The world will misread everything you say." Jungkook smirked slightly. "Let them misread. We've been misread already. This time we give them the right text to misinterpret." He stepped toward the door, but Jimin asked one more thing, softer now, older now, human now. "You sure you can face him without armor?" Jungkook stopped, looked at the mirror again, the same fluorescent mirror from the restroom earlier, still buzzing faintly like a forgotten instrumental track. He touched his chest once. "No armor," he said, "not this time." And for the first time in 4 days, the silence around him broke, not with noise, not with confession, but with movement toward truth. The elevator ride down to the ICU felt longer than any world tour flight. He could feel every second ticking like engagement metrics climbing toward a reveal point. Except this time, the reveal was not engineered by editors or producers. It was engineered by months of emotional silence none of them could monetize anymore. He stepped off the elevator, ICU corridor, antiseptic air, Taehyung awake behind a door. But Jungkook still didn't know the full truth. Because the folded paper had one more page beneath it. A page the nurse hadn't mentioned yet. A page that carried a different kind of correlation. Not gene to immune response, but gene to heart. And Jungkook was about to open it next. Jungkook stepped into the ICU corridor with a stillness that felt deliberate, like someone hitting record before taking a breath. The floor was a soft composite vinyl, engineered to mute footsteps, but nothing could mute the sound inside his head. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and cold air, the universal scent of hospitals that carried no nostalgia and no mercy. Nurses moved past him in calm professional loops, check vitals, update charts, deliver meds, repeat. But Jungkook wasn't in a loop anymore. He was in a break. The door to Taehyung's room sat slightly ajar, a thin beam of warmer light spilling into the corridor. Not warm like comfort, warm like exposure. He pushed it open slowly, his pulse rising not in panic but in inevitability. Inside, Taehyung was propped up against pillows, hair slightly messy in that effortless way fans had always romanticized without knowing the exhaustion behind it. Tubes trailed from his arm and chest, but his eyes were open, tired, yes, but frighteningly lucid. The kind of lucidity that arrives when someone has stopped performing. Taehyung looked at him first, voice thin, textured like sandpaper dragged gently over old wounds. "You came." Jungkook sat down without answering immediately, hand moving into his jacket pocket again. The folded lab results still there, but now it carried a second page underneath. He pulled it out, thumb brushing the corner like someone about to scroll into a truth that couldn't buffer. The nurse entered quietly behind him, closing the door softly and exiting like an editing cut no one asked for. Jungkook unfolded the second page. This time the chart was different, not autoimmune markers, not immune collapse progression. This was neurological, emotional, and terrifying in its clarity. Neural immune, regulator synchronization, detected between matched carriers. Stability factor, emotional engagement and direct communication. But secondary correlation found. Emotional sensory imprint alignment score, 98.7% match. Bond type classification, beyond psychological attachment. Designation, biologically reinforced pair bond emotional imprint. Jungkook froze. The words weren't science fiction. They were science, but the kind of science idols were never trained to read out loud. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Taehyung blinked slowly, confused by the tension, not the content. "What does it say?" Jungkook looked up at him, eyes glassy now, not crying yet but brimming like an unrendered emotional file. "They found something else." "Doctor." Shin entered the room this time without ceremony. She didn't need drama. The room already had too much plot. "The second page," she said quietly, "is the part you weren't supposed to see without support." Jungkook laughed once, sharp, brittle. "Support? I'm barely supporting myself right now." "The gene doesn't transmit disease," she continued, "but it does create regulatory dependency loops between matched carriers under trauma. What we discovered is that your emotional profiles don't just match. They imprint on each other biologically. It's a form of neural epigenetic pair bonding. Your bodies respond to each other under extreme stress, emotional rupture, or prolonged silence." Taehyung frowned. "Pair bonding like love." She didn't smile, she didn't soften it. Love is the closest human word. Biology is the actual one. Jungkook swallowed hard, jaw tightening. "So you're saying we weren't subtle, we weren't dramatic, we were biological?" "Yes," she replied. "Your connection stabilizes him. Your silence destabilizes him. The conflict didn't make him sick. The unresolved emotional disconnection did." Taehyung looked down at his IV line, then at Jungkook. "You thought leaving protected me." "I thought being near you was the trigger," Jungkook said, voice cracking slightly. "But I didn't know the trigger wasn't proximity, it was silence." "You went silent because you were scared," Taehyung said. "But I stayed silent because I was terrified you'd see me break." Jungkook stood abruptly, chair screeching again, this time loud enough to feel like rebellion. "And we almost lost you because of it." Taehyung shook his head. "No, you almost lost me because no one said anything real, not because of the fights, because of the pauses after them." Jungkook stared at him. The eye contact was no longer scripted tension. It was regulation, recognition, a connection their bodies understood even if their mouths didn't. "So what do we do now?" Jungkook whispered. Taehyung reached out, hand trembling but intentional, grabbing his sleeve. "We stop letting silence be the villain." Jungkook knelt slightly, lowering himself to eye level with someone who was no longer performing resilience. "Then I stay," he said. "Not for vitals, for truth." Dr. Shin exhaled. "Good, because if you both walk away from honesty again, the gene will be the least of your problems." Jungkook finally sat again, but this time closer, hand hovering near Taehyung's. He didn't grab it immediately. He let the moment land. Let the silence be a comma, not a period. "You want me to hold your hand?" Taehyung asked quietly. "No," Jungkook replied, eyes glinting. "I want you to hold mine back." Taehyung finally smirked weakly, a tired smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "That I can do." The room exhaled with them, not healed, not resolved, but synchronized. And outside that door, the world was still trending fragments of their story, not knowing the real revelation wasn't autoimmune, not syndrome, not collapse. It was connection. The kind you can't delete halfway through a voicemail. The kind biology refuses to mute. The kind idols are terrified to name. But the kind the world can't stop watching once it begins to make sense. And now it finally did. For the people inside the room at least. The world would catch up soon. But first they had to speak. And Jungkook finally opened his phone again, not to check missed calls, but to hit reply. Jungkook unlocked his phone with a thumb that no longer hesitated. The screen glowed brighter than the sterile white of the ICU walls, casting a faint reflection across his face, sharp, unfiltered, real. The group chat notifications were stacking like headlines, but he ignored them all. He opened Taehyung's contact thread instead. For the first time in days, he typed first. "Are you stable? I'm here, talk to me." He didn't press send immediately. He looked at Taehyung, who was already watching him, not curious, not impatient, just observant in that quiet way only someone emotionally fluent could be. Jungkook finally hit send. The message delivered. No typing bubbles, no buffering, just arrival. Taehyung's phone buzzed on the bedside table. He reached for it slowly, but Jungkook beat him to it, not grabbing the phone, grabbing the moment. He slid it toward him gently, like passing a mic instead of a device. Taehyung opened the message. His breath stuttered slightly. "Delivered," he said quietly, almost amused. "You could have just said it out loud, Kook." "I wanted proof that silence is optional now," Jungkook replied. Taehyung smiled, once tired, small, but finally not forced. "I'm stable, but you're asking the wrong question." Jungkook frowned. "Then what's the right one?" Taehyung tapped his chest lightly, right above the tangle of tubes. "Not whether I'm stable, whether I'm still me, whether you still recognize the person under all this hardware." Jungkook leaned back into the chair, studying him. "You're still you. The world just added UI overlays." Taehyung exhaled a laugh. "UI?" "Yeah," Jungkook said, smirking slightly. "Tubes, monitors, buzzes, PR teams, fandoms, visual noise, but the core process is intact." The monitor beeped once, slow and rhythmic. Not urgent, just present. Taehyung looked at the machine, then at Jungkook. "You know what's funny? The monitor never lied. We did." Jungkook looked away briefly, jaw tightening again, not with rage, but recognition of guilt's aftertaste. "HYBE wants to release statements tonight." Taehyung nodded. "They already drafted them before we woke up this morning." Jungkook frowned. "You sound unsurprised." "I'm a public figure, Kook," Taehyung said. "I've lived through narratives heavier than autoimmune charts. I just didn't expect the heaviest one to be the silence between us." Jungkook leaned forward again. "Then we end it." Taehyung blinked. "End what?" "The silence." A pause landed. This one felt intentional, mutual, like a rest beat in a song no one had mastered yet. Taehyung looked down at his hands, then at Jungkook's. "And what replaces it?" Jungkook opened the second page of the lab result again and placed it on Taehyung's lap deliberately. The medical jargon was dense, unreadable to anyone outside the situation, but Taehyung didn't need to parse every term to understand the subtext burning between the lines. "It says we regulate each other," Jungkook said quietly, "but regulation is not enough. We need resolution." Jimin knocked softly before entering, holding a cup of warm tea like a peace offering that was too late and too early at the same time. He placed it on the table without interrupting their eye contact. "They're calling a board meeting tonight," Jimin said quietly. "We know," Jungkook said, "but this time we walk into the meeting without drafts, without filters, without silence." Jimin nodded. "Then you need to understand the rest of the test." Jungkook froze again. Taehyung frowned. "There's more." Jimin looked at them both. "Yeah, the correlation wasn't just dormant gene markers." Jungkook exhaled sharply. "Then what?" Jimin's voice dropped to a whisper, so quiet the mics off camera wouldn't even detect it. "It was emotional sensory alignment. The gene doesn't activate because you left. It activated because your bodies are reinforced by a bond you both refuse to name." Jungkook frowned. "Reinforced by what?" Taehyung swallowed once. Jimin didn't answer. Because Taehyung already whispered the word before he could. "Love." Jungkook's heartbeat froze again. The room's air thinned. The machine beeped louder now in contrast, the only thing still running at default BPM. You said you didn't want to be a burden, Jungkook said to Taehyung, but you carried love like it was too heavy to pronounce. And you carried silence like armor, Taehyung replied. Jimin watched them both quietly. Then maybe, he said, voice thin, you two should stop treating love like a lab anomaly. Taehyung closed his eyes briefly, exhaling. Jungkook didn't stand this time. He didn't shout. He didn't perform pain either. He just leaned forward and finally said the sentence that should have opened this narrative instead of closing it. I went silent because I didn't know how to carry love without breaking it. But now, I know silence weighs more than truth. Taehyung opened his eyes again, hand trembling slightly but grabbing Jungkook's sleeve once more. And truth weighs more than heartbreak, he said quietly, but it heals faster than silence ever could. The air shifted again. The storm didn't end, it stabilized. But stabilization was not resolution. Because outside that door, the board meeting was already being scheduled, translators already prepping feeds, PR already drafting hashtags, fandom already waiting for the next refresh. But inside that ICU room, two hearts had finally hit sync. Not through genes, through words. And the world was about to hear the rest soon. But first, they had to survive the meeting. Together, not in silence anymore. The HYBE boardroom lighting was engineered for clarity, 6000K studio white panels recessed into acoustic ceiling tiles, no shadows, no ambiguity, no place to hide emotional distortion. The table was black oak veneer, microphones embedded flush like landmines waiting for honesty to step too close. This was not a hospital corridor anymore. This was a place narratives went a trial. Taehyung walked in first. Not collapsed, not trembling, not dramatic. But quiet in a way that made executives sit up straighter. Because Taehyung's silence had always been aesthetic, intentional, brandable. But this silence was different. This silence was the kind that arrives before a verdict. Jimin entered behind him holding a folder that now felt ceremonial. Jungkook came last, hoodie down this time, piercings glinting faintly under boardroom glare. No caps, no theatrics, just presence heavy enough to crash a server. CEO Park cleared his throat. We've prepared a statement. No, Taehyung said immediately, sitting down. You prepared a narrative. We're done reading from scripts today. The board stilled. Not RPM, not SEO, not engagement loops. Just pure attention retention. Park frowned slightly. The report leaked. The press wants answers. And you want control, Jungkook said, pulling out his chair. But this time the leak wasn't the problem. The gap was. Taehyung placed both hands on the table, palm down, steady, like anchoring a live broadcast no editor could splice. You think silence protects idols, but silence almost killed one. Jimin winced slightly, not offended, not defensive, just remembering the ICU beeps that sounded like regret. COO hand flipped a page of the draft anyway. This is the safest version for stakeholders. Taehyung leaned forward. Stakeholders are not the ones who stopped answering calls. I was. Jungkook exhaled a small laugh, sharp but controlled. And I was the one who stopped calling because I thought proximity was the trigger. And emotional rupture was, Jimin said quietly, finally opening the folder. Not the gene, not the immune system, the disconnect. Hand blinked, disconnect. Jungkook tapped the second page of the medical report he had now unfolded in the center of the table like evidence. You saw markers, doctors saw correlation, we saw silence, but biology saw something else. Taehyung didn't look at the chart, he looked at the board. Say it. Jimin looked between them, then at the executives. Biologically reinforced neural epigenetic emotional imprint alignment, dependency under trauma, stability under direct communication. The board looked blank. Not because they didn't understand the science, but because they finally understood the subtext. Park pinched the bridge of his nose. So you're telling me the public narrative is wrong? Taehyung shook his head. The narrative isn't wrong, it's incomplete. The truth wasn't in the argument, it was in the silence after it. And we're filling the silence now, Jungkook said, voice low but immovable. CFO Min leaned back into his chair. And what exactly do you call this bond you're both orbiting around without nomming? Taehyung's pulse jumped once, not enough to trip a monitor but enough to trip the truth. Jungkook looked at him first. Not the executives. Not the investors. Not the cameras that didn't exist here, but always existed outside. Taehyung finally spoke, voice soft, American fluent, emotionally native. Love. The word landed like a global notification push. No edits, no filters, no drafts, no shareholder approval. Just truth with a 98.7% alignment score in hindsight. Min exhaled a long sigh, then the official statement changes. No, Taehyung said gently, not changes, finishes. Jungkook smirked faintly. We don't want PR, we want punctuation. The board finally went quiet again. But this time the silence was a comma, not a crisis. Park closed the draft folder and slid it aside. Then you two write the ending together. Taehyung nodded once. Jungkook tapped the table lightly. Together, Jungkook echoed. Not because it sounded dramatic, but because silence was no longer a strategy their bodies could survive. And outside that door, the world was still waiting to refresh their feed, unaware that the highest RPM moment of the story was not immune collapse, not airport collapse, not leaked test results. It was the moment Taehyung finally named the bond no PR team could trademark. A bond that stabilized vitals, spiked engagement, and saved a life not through genes, but through words spoken before silence could kill the narrative. And now the narrative had finally found its owner again. Taehyung. Not the chart. Not the leak. Not the hallway. The human in the room. The core process under the overlays. Still himself. Still real. Still speaking. Finally, the first draft of the statement wasn't written by PR this time. It was written by Taehyung, seated in the center of a room designed for investors, not emotions. His pen hovered over a HYBE-branded notepad, minimalist cream-white paper with a debossed logo at the bottom corner, subtle enough to look premium, useless enough to hide nothing. Jungkook sat beside him, scrolling not to avoid the world but to prepare to face it. Jimin leaned against the glass wall behind them, arms crossed, watching history rewrite itself without metaphors. Taehyung wrote slowly, but not because he was unsure. He wrote slowly because he finally cared about cadence instead of speed. He had spent a decade delivering lines crafted by committees. Today he was crafting the line that delivered him back. We're trending already, Jungkook said quietly, eyes on his screen. Hashtag predictions, fan theories, narrative fragments, the usual. Taehyung didn't stop writing. Let them trend. This time the algorithm is reacting to us, not dictating us. Jungkook nodded. Bold of you to treat the internet like a courtroom stenographer. Taehyung smirked slightly. It's not bold if it's overdue. He finished the sentence and slid the pad toward Jungkook. No dramatic push. No flourish. Just a quiet handoff that felt louder than any embedded microphone could amplify. Jungkook read it once, twice, then laughed under his breath. You really opened with love as the headline. It was the diagnosis, Taehyung replied. No, Jungkook said, tapping the page. It was the treatment. Jimin finally spoke up from the back. It was the reason silence became dangerous. The test just confirmed what your bodies were screaming while your mouths went offline. Taehyung glanced at Jimin, then back at the paper. Bodies can't testify, words have to. Jungkook stood and walked to the espresso machine in the corner, A sleek matte black unit humming softly, grinding beans like an ASMR track executives pretended not to enjoy. He poured a shot, then another, placing one cup in front of Taehyung. No steam theatrics, no product placement aura, just caffeine and camaraderie. Taehyung took a sip. This tastes like honesty. That's because it isn't sweetened, Jungkook replied. A moment passed, not awkward, not painful, not needing a script. The silence felt functional now, like the breath between verses, not the void between people. COO Han returned to the room, no folder this time, no drafts, no stakeholder risk matrix, just posture slightly softened by reality's inevitable audit. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Taehyung met his eyes. "We've never been surer about anything in our careers." Jungkook leaned back in his chair. If stakeholders wanted safety, they should have invested in machines. They invested in humans. Humans break. Humans bond. Humans heal through direct communication, not press releases. Han exhaled. Then the market will hear the humans speak. Taehyung nodded, standing this time, but not abruptly, standing like someone taking the stage after rehearsals ended. "Let the cameras roll," he said. "But don't expect performance, expect presence." Jungkook smirked again, softer now. Presence has higher RPM anyway. Jimin pushed himself off the wall and walked toward the door, hand on the handle. "The world doesn't need timestamps," he said. "It needs continuity, and you two finally have it." Taehyung took one last sip of espresso, placed the cup down, and followed him. Jungkook walked beside him, not behind, not ahead. Beside. A placement no director could choreograph better than biology already had. The hallway outside was waiting. The internet outside was waiting. The shareholders outside were waiting. But for the first time, Taehyung wasn't waiting for permission to finish a narrative that had always belonged to him. He already finished it on paper. Now he just had to speak it into the lens. Not to trend. Not to monetize. Not to protect an image. But to prove that silence had lost its role in their story. And love had finally found its voice. Unscripted. Unfiltered. Unmuted. Finally,